This past Sunday, we began or went back to a series I started several years ago and have gone back to the series on and off depending upon various circumstances. It's called Paging Through the Scriptures. And the essential idea of this series is let's do an Old Testament survey, taking chunks of several chapters, 2 to 5 to whatever it might be, depending upon what's in there, and try to bring out the vitality of life, or help the people in our church connect with those events in more than just a disconnected, fact-based way. Oh, this king did this, he conquered these nations, or this guy oppressed Judah this way, and these people were killed. I mean, you can read those in fact-based understanding, which is important, but sometimes we forget that those facts also relate to actual people. And so one of the things that I try to do is bring out the reality, the realness of these stories, to see the biblical characters, both the protagonists and the antagonists, in real life situations. Not to justify the wrong things they do or whatever it might be, but to help us to understand them, because if we understand why Saul chose to not wait for Samuel instead of, and sacrificed for him on his own, or why he chose to not kill Agag when he was commanded to, yes, it was violating what God had said, but if we can understand what may have been going on in the mind of the King Saul, that will help us be less haughty in our judgment of him, in the sense that I would never do such a thing. And one of the things I try to come back to is a lot of us would have done a lot of the same foolish, sinful things that a lot of the protagonists did, for sure, and maybe even some of the antagonists, but by the grace of God. So, I mean, that's part of the reason why I do it, so that we can also make it more accessible. And when you read your Old Testament, it can maybe hopefully be a little more approachable for the Christian. So that's the general picture of what that series is. Now, as far as where we're at now, because it's been a series that I don't know how many lessons we've done on it over the number of years, we're in 2 Samuel chapter 16. So we're already through all the way up to there in the Old Testament. And just to bring us up to speed here in this review, this is during the reign of King David. Just in the previous few chapters, we had in chapter 11 and 12, David sinned with Bathsheba. Very simply, David saw a woman who was beautiful, bathing. He wanted her. He called her over. They had relations. She got pregnant. He knew she was married to one of his mighty men. David tried to cover it up by having her husband and be intimate with his wife. Didn't work out that way. And ultimately, David, with the help of Joab, and that'll come up later, at least if not today, then another summary, with the help of Joab, put Uriah to death by putting him in a place of battle and then making sure that he died. And this caused all kinds of catastrophic problems. David was judged by the Lord, in the sense of his child died. There's going to be problems in his house continually, and this is what brings us to our current context. So after Bathsheba and David lost their child, they had another child. Solomon was born. But he had other sons and daughters as well. One of his sons, his firstborn, was named Amnon. Amnon, in chapter 13 of 2 Samuel, really was attracted to his half-sister Tamar, and her who was dearly beloved by her full brother Absalom. The short story is a horrible, tragic, and wicked story. Amnon conspired with his good friend to pretend to be sick so that his half-sister would take care of him, and when she did, he raped her. That's the short of it. And she was devastated. Her brother, her full brother Absalom, consoled her and took care of her. And in so many ways, Absalom's response to his sister is one that any husband, any father, any brother could I think understand. But Absalom did not respond properly, and he conspired later on and murdered Amnon. And throughout all this, you have problems of David not dealing with his sons as they ought to be dealt with. Amnon, for rape, should have been dealt with according to the law, which was he should have been executed, but he wasn't. All kinds of things. And we see this as a pattern in a failing of David's life. But just for the purpose of the the review we had on Sunday, Absalom had killed Amnon, and he'd been ostracized. He was kicked out of the nation, out of the area, but then ended up being brought back. And so we came in chapter 16, right after in chapter 15, Absalom had been sitting in the gate, essentially winning the hearts of the people over to himself instead of David. And at the end of that chapter 15 of 2 Samuel, he had essentially wooed away or brought by trickery several hundred men of David's from Jerusalem to be with where Absalom was. They came willingly, but ultimately I think end up as hostages there. He had also taken over at least one of David's chief counselors. We'll talk about him a little more in a second, but it was bad. And so David and his household and some of his allies in the city had to flee. Otherwise the city would be destroyed and they'd be overwhelmed. And so this sets up with this civil war between Absalom and David. Absalom on his side, like I said, he'd already depleted some of the military might of David in the city by those couple hundred men. He gathered and weakened David by taking Ahithophel. Ahithophel was one of David's counselors, and again, I'll talk about him in a second. But David, as he's fleeing, he leaves just 10 concubines to take care of the palace, his house essentially, and everybody else they leave with almost no provisions and few individuals. He also instructs Zadok the priest and his son and nephew to stay behind to act as essentially an intelligence delivering group. If you find out what's going on, send word by these two runners and they can get me word. Here's where I'll be. He also asks a man by the name of Hushai, another counselor, to go back and to feign his allegiance to Absalom and to thwart the counsel of Ahithophel, who'd already gone over to Absalom. Now I want to talk a little bit about Ahithophel and Hushai, because this I thought was a very interesting and helpful part of the story. Ahithophel, we see in 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 23. Ahithophel, his word, his wisdom, it was as of one inquired of the word of God. So he was a very esteemed counselor. But what he did though was if you see just in verse 21, he counseled Absalom when he came into the city to go up and essentially have sex with David's 10 concubines. I mean, these are women that David, his essential basic wives of David's, and Ahithophel's counsel was go and have sex with them to make yourself really abhorrent to your father. And this is, I think, significant and at least important to think about, because if you look through and you read through this section of the Old Testament, Ahithophel is related to, I believe he is Bathsheba's grandfather or great uncle. I forget the exact connection there. I've got it in my notes from Sunday, but he is a close relative to Bathsheba. And again, if you remember how David treated Bathsheba and her husband and the rest of the nation, it wasn't just Bathsheba's husband, Uriah, who died in that battle that David set up. It was other men of Israel died as well. So Ahithophel, I think it's reasonable to assume that he had some significant long-term anger against David in how he dealt with particularly his own family. But his counsel was seen as really wise, again, as one who inquired of God as far as his advice. So Absalom was very much following his lead. Well, some of the interplay between Ahithophel and Hushai, again, Ahithophel's the guy who was totally on Absalom's side. Hushai is kind of the double agent for David in Absalom's court. And so when Ahithophel counsels then after Absalom has made himself odious to David, he says, if you look here in verse 1 of chapter 17, he says, please give me 12,000 men that I might go and take David out now. Ahithophel says, this is the best time. He's on the run. He's got no provisions. He hasn't had a chance to really organize a defense. Let me take 12,000 men, find him, catch him, and kill him. And that was his advice. And then what happens then is Absalom listens to that, but then probably like any leader would do, and it's generally wise to do this, he asks for another opinion, and he gets the opinion of Hushai. Now, Hushai, unbeknownst to Absalom, is working for David. And Hushai says, wait a second, if you go out now and David wins, you will lose all of your support, because they know that David's a valiant warrior, which is true. You know that he's going to fight like a caged bear, which is true. He's probably already, Hushai says, hidden himself in these strong places, which was not true. So he counsels Absalom to wait, to muster his forces, and then go out later to fight. Well, we find out that Absalom took Hushai's advice, and by nightfall of that same day, the traitor counselor Ahithophel realizes that Absalom is not taking his advice, is not taking his advice, and is not going to be able to win against David. I mean, if he's this wise, Ahithophel sees his only chance for career advancement is to be the primary counselor to Absalom. Right now, Hushai has already displaced him, really. But furthermore, he sees that the best time to take David out would have been now, and missing that opportunity, we're in trouble because David's gonna find a way to win. And so Ahithophel goes back and takes care of some of his business and kills himself because he knows his hopes of anything is over. And so the story continues that David ends up fighting against Absalom. He divides his forces into three parties. It essentially neutralizes some of by that, and the terrain neutralizes Absalom's greater strength in numbers, and they win the day. And there's so much more I could say about what happened in this section, but you can watch the entire Sunday school lesson for that if you'd like. So hope this was just a good taste of what we had in those chapters, and come next Sunday, I believe we'll do the next section is my plan. So come to Sunday school 9:15 Sunday morning, and I'd love to see you there. God bless.